to make it a little bit personal and make it very real, I'll talk about some of those changes that I've made in my training recently. One of them is exercise order, and the other is
Yeah.
just kind of utilizing intensifiers to get more out of each set or get more out of, we'll say, a volume progression before an intensity progression. So, like one of the things, like I love back squatting. Back squatting is my favorite movement in the gym to do, period. So it's always in my program to some degree, but I can't always squat heavy because I'm broken. So that's the end
In
of
more
that.
than one way.
Yeah, yeah, physically, mentally, emotionally, which that's good for squatting, except for the physical one. But what I've done to kind of modulate squat intensity, kind of broad spectrum over the course of, we'll say, the last 3 months, but also over the course of like the last year or like multiple years, is one of the things that I'll do is I'll modify the order of my squat movement. Right? It's probably about 3 months ago. Squatting heavy was lower priority, and I'm pretty proficient in the squat. So what I would do is I would focus more on my hypertrophy work outside of squatting, and I'd have a squat later in the workout because it was something that I know that I can execute at a relatively high degree, even under fatigue. But I wanted to modulate the load that I was using session to session. So I wanted to allocate more fatigue to hypertrophy work than I did towards strength specific work. So I would have like a moderate squat volume. I'd probably do like 3 sets of 5 at a challenging weight, like RPE 7 or 8. But what I would do before that, I'd walk in the gym and I would start with a B stance RDL and a 45-degree hip extension. From there, I would go to some sort of externally supported like squat type variation. I was on hack squat for a while, and then I would do split squats after that, and then I would squat. So it would
Yeah.
be there's a bit of repetition in that specific variation, but basically the message that I'm trying to convey is that squatting was lower priority, even though it's a highly technical skill, but it would be lower down in the order because it was a lower priority. That was more skill maintenance with the hypertrophy focus. And now, about 3 months later, I've gotten to the point where I've worked up that squat to basically B1 in terms of order. Like A1, A2 is still the things that are going to make me feel good in terms of squatting, which is a B stance RDL, 45-degree hip extension. There, that's kind of my standard squat warm up. And then A1, A2, then B1 is going to be back squat. And I'm at the point where I'm like doing a top set of 5, one back off set, and then I move on. And then after that, I've removed any secondary, like externally supported squatting movement at that point because the intensity is so high on my back squat that I don't want to get too repetitive, and I don't necessarily want to accumulate stress in terms of loading. So what I'll do is I'll go with a movement that is less externally supported, like right now I'm doing a bilaterally loaded rear foot elevated split squat. And now with that's a movement that's been in my program for a while, but I'll tell you the progression there is I started with a contralateral load, and I would do that kind of earlier on in the session, and I would progress that for loading for a while. And there's a bit of a tempo, but it was more so like, all right, I'm going to get relatively heavy with these because I want some sort of stimulus of load because I'm diminishing the amount of load that I'm going to get from my actual squat pattern because it's lower down in the exercise order, it's later in the workout. And the progression now is that after I squat, I go right to that bilaterally loaded rear foot elevated split squat. But if you really hate yourself, here's something that you could throw in. You could do it as a rest pause. So
Ooh.
I've been doing them not only tempoed, but tempo with a rest pause.
You're
So I'll
using
get away.
bodybuilder words now.
Yeah, right. I know. And you know what? In 9 weeks, I put 4 inches on my quads.
Oh, jeez.
Legit.
It's, it's, it's good to know that you're finally willing to train hard. at the gym?
Oh, that hurts. That hurts so bad. No, because that's the correlation with the self hate. It's like
Yeah.
no one hates me more than I hate me.
Yeah.
uh, but basically, what I'm getting at is that I chase down a loading progression in this more stability based exercise, something that's not very externally supported, contralateral load. And now what I'm doing, it's more of a volume progression, and I'm artificially increasing intensity with tempo and rest pause. And I'm actually in a more stable position because now I have
Yeah.
a bilateral load. So I'm able to accommodate center of mass a bit better, and really focus tension into the muscles that I'm trying to train. So that's kind of like those two worked kind of inversely throughout that the last 3 months of training, is that the priorities kind of switched, and I'm trying to get the most out of the least for both of those movements for as long as I can.
Yeah. I think it's important to just kind of like highlight that you're saying that now you're kind of chasing this more volume progression when it comes to the split squats. And the reason why you can do this is because the volume now with the prior portion of the training is so low, because the intensity and the loading is so high that that's kind of all you can afford on that end. And now you can go into an exercise that maybe you won't be taxed as much like axially or just like systemically, but you can really push the volume progression there. And like you said, like it's a more stable environment just because you're bilateral loading. And even like when progressing the contralateral side of things, like the reason why you could push that so hard is because you have like a decent ability to stabilize in even like with a hard deviation of center of mass. Like someone who doesn't have that ability would not be able to push that and load, and they would have to look for other qualities within the same movement. Or like even the reason why you could afford to have a back squat so late in the session is because you're so proficient in the back squat that it's not like a highly skilled movement for you at this point. Like you can afford to do it when you're kind of tired. Once you've banged out a bunch of like volume to your legs directly in a hack squat, once you've done all these things, you can still maintain a squat pretty decently. And I'm just highlighting this because I don't want people to just say, "Oh, Jay said that you can have your back squat as like your D1 movement." But I mean, it shows that I always think that if you look at someone's program, if you look at like the first two or three movements, you should be able to tell kind of what their main goal is.
Yeah.
And if we talk about like these two different progressions, like how they inverted from the last 3 months to the last, I don't know, 6 months or year that you were training, it was very clear what you were specifically looking at in these two different sessions. Like you were clearly not looking to maximize your squat on the previous block. You were
Right.
looking to search different adaptations, maybe like in a more work capacity way, hypertrophy, whatever focus you want to be able to insert there. And squat just was just an issue of maintaining skill. And now it's kind of the other way around. And the adding the volume becomes kind of like a secondary aspect. But now that you have the work capacity, you can just push it really hard with other mediums where you don't need to be super externally stabilized, and you can kind of like approach different runways of progression that, I mean, 4 inches in your quads. I don't know when was the last time you had a 4 inch increment in a specific muscle group in that portion of time, but
Yeah.
that only happens after you can have the clarity to run these progressions. And like what we always talk about, right? Like if you have more tools on your toolbox, there's so many more things that you could do to drive. If you're talking about hypertrophy, so many people think, like, I don't think that when people say best hypertrophy movement for quads, people would think rear foot elevated. They would just go like directly hack squat, leg press, I don't know, hamstring curls. But since the toolbox is so like wide, you can pick so many things and you can still derive this certain types of stimulus that will get you to where you want to get.